people living on Delmarva, you've probably heard the name Patty Cannon a few times, especially in Dorchester, Caroline, and Sussex counties, areas she frequented.
Yeah. So the question is, who is the real Patty Cannon? Brian Spiros is at the Seaford Museum this afternoon with the answer to that very question. Brian?
Well, Jimmy and Lisa, the Seaford Museum has an exhibit about Patty Cannon talking about her life and reputation. Now, some people are under the belief that Cannon actually helped slaves escape to the north during the 19th century. However, it's actually the exact opposite, and her story is sinister to the core. Take a look.
There are many words you can use to describe Patty Cannon.
First woman serial killer, absolutely no redeeming qualities whatsoever.
And that's putting it nicely. Janet Jones is the manager of the Seaford Museum. She's read the books that have been written about Cannon and knows what she was all about.
She claimed that she was helping runaway slaves get to the north. In actuality, she was doing just the opposite.
Janet says Cannon was born in Canada around 1760. She met a traveling salesman from Delmarva named Jesse. The two married and came back to Sussex County. Around 1808, slaves were no longer being shipped to the U.S. from Africa, so slave trade became a popular way to make money, and sending slaves down south could fetch big bucks. Patty Cannon got wrapped up in it all. She and her gang of men scoured the peninsula for their victims.
They kidnapped sailors off the ships, businessmen traveling through the area, but as I say, her main focus was free black men, and then she would imprison them until she had enough to put on her ship, which was moored right out here, and sail them to the larger plantations in the south and resell them.
Janet says Cannon didn't like anyone getting in her way, even her own husband.
Jesse actually objected to all the killing and that was going on, and so she poisoned him.
Patty Cannon's house was right between Dorchester and Sussex counties, in the town of Reliance. That home no longer exists. Many people mistaken this as the home because of the historical marker that sits in front of it. However, this is the tavern, which Cannon and her son-in-law opened. He too was part of her gang, and it's said this is where all the shady dealings took place.
It was right at a crossroads. It was an ideal place to build a tavern, so travelers, businessmen, people, traveling, especially on their way maybe from Cambridge or Easton to Georgetown, would stop and spend the night and have something to eat.
Many didn't realize what was going on inside the tavern, behind closed doors, in secret rooms. People were held here against their will before being shipped south, and in some cases, killed. Janet says no one had any idea any of this was going on.
So because she was a woman, no one really ever suspected her of anything.
Evidently, she must have been a great actress because she had people convinced that she was helping runaway slaves get to the north. And people believed her because she was a woman, and she was evidently, she was attractive, she was articulate, and so they believed her, and she got away with this for about 25 years.
Once authorities began to suspect something was up, they still couldn't get her.
Her house straddled the Maryland-Delaware line, and a number of times Delaware authorities would go to question her and she'd go to Maryland. Maryland authorities would come to question her and she'd go to Delaware. She got away with doing that several times. Finally, Maryland and Delaware got together and went and arrested her.
Cannon ended up in cuffs. Her gang of men disappeared. And while she sat in jail, she once again took matters into her own hands.
After she saw that they were building a gallows to hang her, she somehow got poisoned and poisoned herself.
It all seems like fiction, but victim accounts and articles printed in newspapers back then give proof to the story.
Why do you think people are so fascinated by Patty Cannon's story?
It is so unnatural for a woman especially a woman who's had children, to be so bloodthirsty and evil. It just totally, you know, flies in the face of truth. I mean, it just doesn't seem natural at all.
Natural? No, but certainly not impossible.
Now, Janet says up until Cannon took her own life, she claimed that she was innocent, and there were those who believed her. Now, as for how many slaves she sent south, that number is unclear, but it's believed to be somewhere in the thousands. Now, the exhibit here at the Seaford Museum about Patty Cannon goes into much more detail about her life, and there's also a $54 million question. What's that all about? Well, you'll have to come into the museum to find out. So, Jimmy and Lisa, it's a story that's as interesting as it is horrible, but interesting to say the least. So we'll send it back to you in the studio.
Wow.
I have to admit, when I go to a museum, I like to look at things, I like to touch at things. And like Brian said, there's so much to read here. There's so much to the story. This is the first place I've ever gone that I wanted to read. I wanted to know more.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you. Incredible story.
You're welcome.
I think a great movie.
Yeah.
Let's cast
I don't know if it'll be a great movie or not.
Oh yeah, it's everything.
Yeah.
And our history lesson continues as we celebrate Black History Month. We'll tell you about a celebration of the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. But how far have we come? Where we are seeing modern day slavery. Plus a reenactment of one of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s memorable speeches. It's all ahead on Delmarva Life.